And investors always have different opinions on values based on the opportunity and the risk associated with it. So let's keep talking about the paying too much myth, is what I call it. That fear that you're just going to be paying too much. I don't want to pay too much. And not to say that we're cavalier and that, just throw money around, because as you'll see, I hate solving problems with price. That's my last resort of what I want to do. But let's talk about, can you pay too much for a house? It's really some BS. It's not really true that you can pay too much for a house within reason, right? I could throw some crazy examples out. Paying $10 million for a 1 bedroom, 500 square foot house over in Eastern Washington on a 5,000 square foot lot is crazy. But most of the time, most of the stuff you're going to be looking at is not going to be that way. If you have an investor and you really want to make sure that you are hitting your metrics and hitting your numbers, you may be paying too much. That's why you want your metrics to guide you more than the experience of living in the house. Let's discuss some things that can cause confusion for people, or where they may put emphasis or trust in things that are not as trustworthy, specifically automated valuations. Those are generally BS. They're computer formulas based on big data. They do bring it down to the neighborhood, but they are not accurate. The Zestimate, as an example, is historically not that accurate. That's why the founder offered $1 million reward to anybody that could make it right on. Often with the automated valuations, if you study a house beforehand, which could be hard for you guys to do, we get to do it a lot. We see what the Zestimate is. We see what all the automated valuations are on these properties. And then when we list them on the MLS, the algorithms go through and pick it up, and they move the automated valuation to right by the list price, which is always really interesting to see. Tax assessed value is not a good judgment of the real value. Even around here, where we do the tax assessed value, it gets refreshed pretty frequently. Some parts of the country, they don't do it for years and years at a time. Around here, even when they're updating it, it's not always accurate, because it can take them a year or two to get the appreciation rates in and applied to every property. So the market's been going up for years, and then all of a sudden goes down, like in 2008. It's going to have a really high tax assessed value. Well, the real value is much lower. And then by the time it resets, the market is going back up again, and the tax assessed value is going to be much lower than what would be the fair market value for the property. So they are not a good indicator. Even the list price is not a great indicator of value. And I try to coach people to not get tied to what the list price is as to if they're paying too much or not. List price is almost always about what the seller wants. There are so many agents that just take orders from the sellers, that do whatever the sellers say. And as we mentioned, sellers are always proud of their houses, so they tend to want to overprice them. So the list price doesn't mean what the house is worth. That just means what the seller has agreed to sell it for. So paying list price or more or less is irrelevant in the overall value proposition, especially the value proposition to you. Some people feel like paying $1 more than list price is too much. They might have a hard time in today's market if you're saying that you're only going to pay the list price. Some people think they're willing to pay more than 100,000 over list price. I've had clients in the last few months who have been offering 75 to $250,000 over list price on properties, because that's where the value on those property types in those neighborhoods in those price points is going. And just because you get something under list price doesn't mean that you got a great deal. It's always nice to get under list price, but that still doesn't necessarily mean it's a super great deal. Don't worry as much about what other people are doing or paying or offering or suggesting. Again, stay focused on what is the opportunity worth to you. And even considering the things like the stress of continued shopping, the rent money that you may be throwing away if you're not a homeowner yet, and this is going to be your first place. Every month you're throwing that rent money away and getting nothing for it. So if you paid $20,000 too much and you saved 2 months of appreciation in a hot market and 2 months of rent at $6,000 or $7,000, paying $20,000 too much today can be a deal in 6 months. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you're looking at this. And then lastly, even the appraisals aren't real value. That's the appraiser's opinion of what the house would sell for. It's heavily weighted by the contract price, so it's not even totally factual because it is the contract price weighs a lot in their psychology as they're doing the math and pulling the comps. They're also looking backwards over time. They're going back 6 months for sold sales. Properties that sold 6 months ago might have got in contract. The buyer and seller may have agreed to a price 8 months ago. 8 month ago market is very different from today's market. So just because what they saw historically does not mean what they're forecasting. So that's another challenge with appraiser when people say what the house is worth. It's hard to get a unanimous agreement on what the house is worth. Although appraisals do often come in at value, we say, where they come in at the contract price because of that psychological weighting I mentioned.